I regret that you had to witness that outburst.
So it's the second episode of the second season of Strange New Worlds, and this one's all about number 1. And we've known this one's been coming for a while. Also, they need to tie up the cliffhanger ending from season 1. So, a great trial episode is a great Trek trope, and this can mean only one thing. But as always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, and if you haven't guessed, I'm going to be talking about the second episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. So if you haven't seen it, this will contain spoilers. So it's all about number 1 this week, literally, and again, Pike isn't in it much. I'll mention that later on as well, by the way. But I think this might be the best episode of Strange New Worlds with a very big question mark. I don't mean in terms of overall quality, but the writing is, let's say, a bit more mature and adult. Because we did get Trauma Trek, but it seemed justified because it was given context. Which is a first in, 5 seasons of Discovery nearly and 2 of Strange New Worlds? Sure, it does still fall into some of the new Trek tropes, sadly, but this episode is a marked improvement, and if you ask me, a step in the right direction. It's their version of A Measure of a Man, and it's not too bad, to be honest. I get why a lot of people will like this episode and why it would speak to them, let's put it that way. But apart from number 1, everyone else is a little bit thin in here, but I'll get to that. Just before I get into spoilers, I want to say thanks for taking the time to choose to watch this channel. I really appreciate it, and if you haven't done it already, please hit the subscribe button, and if you make it all the way to the end, leave a like on the video as well. So the episode starts with a flashback of Una's childhood where she's injured, but her parents can't take her to her doctor, as her DNA secrets will be discovered. Then it jumps to the present, and Starfleet wants to give her a deal. Resign in no prison, or go to trial, and if she gets sent down, it's only 2 years in prison. So it's not like it's a hard stretch, let's be honest. Now, we've seen from trailers, Pike is looking for legal help on a non-friendly planet. And I mean non-friendly in terms of atmosphere, because he can't breathe naturally like everyone else. They don't explain why he can't, but they explain why others can. And he's on this planet to see Counsellor Nira, but keeps getting blocked by her secretary, so he's not getting the legal help that he needs, and it turns out that Nira is an old friend of Una. So he does what you'd naturally do and waits till his air supply runs out, so he's effectively choking, and they've got to get him in the room to get oxygen. And twist, well, the first one in this episode, the entire planet are Illyrians. Nira doesn't want to help and doesn't have a particularly good view on Starfleet and the Federation and their laws. And when it comes to genetics especially, she says that they're way out of date and sort of designed to persecute certain races, and that really gets opened up later in this episode. But yeah, my first thought was, well, 2 years in prison isn't that bad. It's not like it's like a slave labour camp or anything like that. Pike convinces her to help, so they go back to Earth, where Una's still in prison with a pretty great view. I mean, that's not a bad view, let's be honest. And it looks as if she's wearing the Discovery Season 1 uniform without the colours. So the way that she sees it is Starfleet basically wants to cover up the fact an illegal, as they view it, got so high in the ranks, and she's not having it. She wants to make a stand. So Captain Patel, who, well, we don't really know what the relationship is with Pike, really, because they don't elaborate, is back. But she wants to keep Pike off the stand, because she doesn't want to put him in the firing line because he knew number 1's secret. Which, again, gets brought up later on. So Starfleet wants to up the charges to add in sedition, so that means 20 years if she gets sent down. So yeah, a little bit more serious, and it adds up the stakes, definitely. So Nira sets up shop on the Enterprise, and La'an wants to help, and thinks a technicality will get number 1 off, as the evidence against her was obtained illegally. Now April is also involved, and we find out that he's the one that helped get Una into Starfleet. We also learn the history of how Pike and number 1 met as well. So with this and the April stuff, that's more story than she got in all of Season 1, let's be honest. Now while this is going on, there isn't really a B story this week. They try and squeeze in a few clips. There's a scene where Tegas and Mbenga are in sort of their version of 10 Forward, keeping an eye on things, and Spock is having a run-in with a sort of former Starfleet nemesis that's another Vulcan. And come on, that's the best you can do with that joke this week.
Most interesting. Could this be human joke number 663?
Now, this could be quite boring, it could have been quite preachy. I generally think the trial sections in this episode are by far the strongest, but Patel's opening defence makes it seem like it's really a human prejudice here, and it's not everyone in the Federation, and it does come off a little bit right-wing, at least just to me. Nina's opener is much stronger and gives a better sort of overall view of everything. And this is where the episode takes a twist that I never expected. It gets serious, which is a first in Strange New Worlds, I think. Once Admiral April takes the stand, he's got to admit that he wouldn't have helped Una join Starfleet if he'd known that she'd a secret sort of genetic identity. And that was kind of a bit tense and really like, oh man. And the really good argument here that's basically a fan debate that's been going on for decades is Nira uses the Prime Directive as an example of a rule that's enforced, bent and broken as it needs to be. When captains think it's worthwhile, they'll break it and seemingly get away with it repeatedly. And she's right, I don't need to give you examples. If you're a Star Trek fan, you know this has been happening since day one. And yeah, I've got to be fair, I do bash this show a little bit sometimes, but this is the best dialogue in most sort of thought out adult scenes this show has ever had. It kind of gives me hope about what they could do in the future. And I get that this is reflecting modern issues in society, and I'm going to get to that later on as well. So the crew all take the stand in their brand new cosplays, and they don't really press Lan for much in her genetic history. It does get brought up, but I thought that was very odd. Like, why not take the time to explain a bit of that? There's a scene between Lan and Nina later on where I thought they were going to do it, but it didn't really work out. And I said in my prediction videos Spock was going to zing an Admiral, but it turns out that he zings Nira a couple of times instead. And I don't get what they're doing with Spock in these episodes. He's not funny. Stop trying to make him funny. The crew, of course, stand up for her, but there's still a mystery on how they found out about her genetic identity after all. Now, this is where one of the first twists comes out, because it turns out that Lan was the one that reported her, because, well, she was pissed off when she found out that Una had been hiding her history. And they get into a bit more detail, as I said, really explore anything about Lan, other than she's worried that her canned DNA might get the better of her one day, and yeah, like, come on, just give us a bit more information. But it turns out Lan wasn't the culprit after all. And this is where there's a twist on twist, because number one takes the stand, and we get a bit more of her story for joining Starfleet, the planet where she grew up, and the deal that people made to live there on a Federation colony, and it all sounds pretty grim. The execution of augments kinda similar to Jews in Germany before the war, and they do really parallel that in this episode. They don't shy away from it. Also, the fact that laws allow some people to get away with this level of persecution, and the Illyrians had to hide their way of life and cultural identity to fit in. So it's very deep stuff for a show that's usually just, well, not a lot going on in terms of that, let's be honest. So it did really surprise and throw me, but while I'm enjoying it, I'm wondering, why haven't you done it sooner? Anyway, twist upon twist, it turns out that it was number one that handed herself in. So, yeah. This kind of threw me a little bit, but she says she wanted people to know who she was and sort of make a stand against it, I guess. So does this mean that she's a psychopath and she's masterminded this entire thing? Kind of. And a bit of the good faith that they made with the writing here has went out the window a little bit for me. Because the next few scenes, the one of the Vulcan Admiral wanting to know when Pike found out so he can sort of get rid of him, made me think, is this guy going to be the bad guy? I don't know, it felt a little bit all over the place. Anyway, number one tells the truth, so Pike's been thrown firmly under the bus. But she's not done yet. Nira's got one more twist up her sleeve and uses Starfleet's own rules against them, as Una was taken in under asylum to escape persecution twice, Once when she was a child, and then once again when Pike found out about her status. So, twist upon twist, as I said. Una's free, but we sort of knew that was coming anyways. There's loads of stuff in the trailer that we haven't seen her in yet. So when you think about it that way, yes, there was no tension in the episode. But you kind of forget about that because this episode was at parts so good. There was tension there and there was stakes. I keep saying it, but this is definitely the best written and most thoughtful out of all the Strange New World episodes that we've had. And although it did lay certain things on a bit heavy and thick, it also made some good social and historical commentary, which good Star Trek should always do and has been lacking for a while. This is one thing that we've missed. I mean, for all the good stuff that was in Picard, it didn't have this taste or tone of Star Trek in it. But the writers of this show can't help themselves, so when Neera's disembarking the Enterprise on the transporter, of course they've got to ruin it. That slow clap ending send-off was cheesy as hell. I mean, was that just me? And then, of course, you got to give a little speech. So guys, come on, like, you ruined it at the last minute. You can't help yourself. And so while it might not be everyone's favourite episode of Strange New Worlds, for me, it proves that they can pull it off when they want to, at least a little bit. The fact that it didn't have a B story, I think, is commendable, because that would have taken away from what was going on in the main A story, so at least they're showing some sort of restraint. But as I mentioned at the start of the video, we've got very little Pike this week, and that's 2 weeks in a row, so I wonder what the hell's going on. Because next week is the Jim Kirk time travel episode, so he's not going to be in that one much either. But as always, I want to hear what you think, so let me know in the comments below. Does this stand up as a classic Trek trial trope episode? Try saying that one 3 times. For me, I hope they can pull more of this off in the future, but I'm not personally that optimistic. I'd just say I'm more hopeful. And if you've made it this far, as always, please leave a like on the video, and if you haven't done it already, subscribe to the channel. My name's Al, thanks for watching.